If you can beat him, I'll marry you. Don't smudge the pieces with those maintenance hands. Read. This table is for people who make decisions, not messes, Victoria Vale said, her voice polished and sharp as the chrome edges of the 29th floor lobby. Someone was always going to pay for a sentence like that. A verbal invoice delivered with such casual cruelty, though nobody in the glassy hush of the high-rise atrium imagined the bill would ever return to her desk. It was past 7 p.m., the skyscraper settling into its nocturnal echo, the air conditioning cycling down to a silent, regulatory hum. The atrium of Helix Dynamics shimmered with curated authority, a temple built to market capitalization. Massive columns were lit like soft, sculpted ice, and a live wall of glossy, hydroponic plants breathed an engineered calm into the space. At the dead center of it all sat a chessboard, inlaid into a slab of polished quartz that had cost more than a dozen average employee salaries combined. Victoria stood over that board in a dress of architectural white, her hair wound into an immaculate, sculptural twist. A thin gold watch caught the overhead light every time she gestured, her hand movements precise, as if slicing the air into obedient, profitable squares. Her court chiefs and VPs wearing badges and borrowed bravado formed a nervous crescent behind her. Drinks sweated in their hands, condensation dripping like nervous thoughts they dared not speak aloud. Opposite Victoria stood Marcus Reed. His coveralls were the color of wet asphalt, absorbing the bright light rather than reflecting it. He had paused, a microfiber cloth still tucked into his belt, its edges frayed from use. His heavy cleaning gloves dangled from his pocket like a white flag signaling a truce that no one cared to notice or honor. "I'm just here to empty bins," he said quietly, his eyes skimming the fixed geometry of the board as though it were a complex street map he could read perfectly, yet knew he had no right to walk upon. "Then empty this one," Victoria replied, tapping the side of her temple with a lacquered finger. "Clear out the fantasy that you can play here." A soft laughter broke around the circle, careful and expensively pitched, the sound of people who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. On the balcony above, the last few coders and analysts leaned over the glass railing with the fascinated cruelty of those grateful it wasn't their turn in the arena. The air in the atrium smelled intensely of citrus polish and the faint, cold metallic tang of elevator cables spooling high above. Somewhere in the vast structure, a floor buffer purred like a colossal, exhausted cat trying to soothe the entire building back to sleep. "The janitor wants a game," said Mark Dalton, head of product, his voice built specifically for podcasting and performance, designed to compress complex ideas into smug, digestible soundbites. "Let him move a pawn. Give the man a story, Mark." Victoria cocked her head only enough to let the diamond at her ear throw a shard of light across the quartz table. "Stories are for shareholders, Mark. Discipline is for everyone else." She twitched a rook with her polished nails, then set it back down, emphasizing the control she possessed over even inanimate objects. "A pantomime of mercy, please. It would be entertaining," someone murmured from the ring of suits. A woman with a glass of crisp Riesling and a stainless, unmoving smile. Marcus felt their gazes stick to him like cheap gum to a designer shoe. He had passed through this lobby for months, wheeling industrial barrels of cleaning supplies past the executive chessboard as if moving past an exhibit in a museum. A collection of symbols representing not the city's culture, but a private corporate mythology of brilliance, conquest, and margins no one else could afford. Tonight, however, the board had a different, unexpected gravity. He looked at the polished black king and felt the slow, old warmth of childhood evenings in dimly lit community halls where ambitions and pride were taped together under humming fluorescent lights, and games of chess were quiet, mathematical proofs that attention and deep planning could fundamentally change a small, contained world. "I don't want trouble," he said. "Good," Victoria said, a tiny smile playing on her lips. "Then don't create any." She glanced at her phone, a micro-gesture of boredom that made the crowd lean closer, hungry for the escalation she might feed them. "Tell you what," she added, lifting her gaze with a grin so bright it felt like it could cut glass. "Beat him and I'll marry you." She pointed the line like an arrow aimed squarely at Dalton, whose chuckle arrived a full second before his sense could catch up. "Deal," he said, his swagger distilling instantly into his stance. I beat the custodian. You put a ring on Q4. The ring of onlookers rippled with a coordinated, slick, corporate ooh, performative and oddly synchronized. Victoria raised an eyebrow at Marcus, her gaze dismissive. You see, you're useful after all, Reed. A measuring stick. Marcus let the words pass over him like indifferent weather. At the edge of the scene, a security guard shifted, uncertain, his radio hissing a faint, private objection that none of the executives bothered to hear over the buzz of their own importance. I'm off the clock, Marcus said, which was true and entirely unhelpful in this manufactured context. Then consider it extracurricular cleaning, Victoria said, her tone sharp. I need my board cleared of illusions. Dalton stepped forward, jacket open, his cufflinks winking like tiny, polished planets catching the light. Come on, he said to Marcus, leaning in slightly. Don't be fragile. We'll play speed chess. 5 minutes. Blink and it's over. You can still catch your train. A camera phone rose, then another, quickly followed by a dozen more. The balcony audience multiplied into a hive of lenses. The atrium's flawless acoustics folded every whisper back into the space until it felt like being inside a seashell, humming with the sound of somebody else's surging blood pressure. Marcus looked at the board. The pieces were heavily weighted, the kind that landed with a dignified, hollow click, as if signing a contract each time they touched a new square. He hadn't played a formal, timed game in years. The cleaning cloth in his belt brushed his hip, a constant, abrasive reminder of what the company actually paid him to touch. If I win, he said, surprising even himself with the clarity of the demand. We shake hands and you apologize. Publicly. Victoria's laugh was champagne poured over cold glass, a sound that was expensive and slightly dangerous. If you win, Reed, I'll buy you a new mop. A better one. A ripple of brittle laughter cracked outward through the audience. Just a handshake and an apology? Marcus repeated softly, but his eyes had steadied now, focusing past the lattice of expectant faces to the fixed geometry on the table. The guard's radio hissed again. A cleaning cart rolled by the far doors, and the night shift receptionist pretended to browse a schedule that hadn't changed in 3 years. Dalton sat, loosening his tie by an almost imperceptible, practice degree, and hit the chess clock with a flourish meant for the clips that were already recording his movements. House rules, he announced. No takebacks, no whining. No gloating, Marcus replied instantly, and touched his king's pawn forward 2 squares. The crowd murmured, pleased that the confrontation had successfully decided to become a certified spectacle. Victoria began to circle the table, moving like a planet with a much sharper orbit, evaluating the angles for maximum dramatic effect more than for strategy. She spoke loudly enough for the balcony audience to hear clearly. Witness engagement, she declared. We build community. Someone in HR laughed too hard at that obvious lie, then quickly looked down at their own shoes, chastened. The pieces began to move in quick, rhythmic clicks. Dalton's knight leapt like a practiced smirk, aggressive and superficial. Marcus's bishop slid into place with quiet, profound purpose. Pawns opened corridors or sealed them shut in tactical silence. Victoria narrated the movements in barbedicides, the kind of commentary that sounds like helpful advice right up until the point it cuts. You can't polish a blunder, she told the heir as Dalton snapped up a pawn with greedy, misplaced satisfaction. Watch his time, someone near the back warned. He's burning seconds like paper. Marcus breathed slow, deeply, the controlled way you do when a massive staircase suddenly looks longer than you remember it being. He saw the reflection of the board in the glass behind the receptionist, and the overlay of the city's indifferent lights beyond. Squares upon squares, decisions upon decisions. Where'd you even learn to play? Dalton asked, making a show of stretching his arm as if warming up for an Olympic event, not a 5-minute game. Same place people learn to work, Marcus said, his voice level. At a table. A murmur answered him, some approving, some merely amused, all entirely prepared to forget the line in the next minute if the script demanded it. Victoria checked her watch, a gesture of almost delicate malice, then leaned down until her expensive, cloying perfume displaced the scent of citrus polish around Marcus. Careful, Reed, she said in the low, controlled tone she reserved for press calls and performance reviews. You don't want to make a mess you can't clean. Marcus met her eyes for the first time. They were the color of a meticulously prepared lawsuit, cold, clear, and utterly unforgiving. He turned back to the board and advanced a pawn that made Dalton snort with dismissive laughter. Cute, Dalton said, and shoved a rook forward hard enough to set off a faint tremble in the quartz table. Phones rose higher. The receptionist's eyes peeked above her monitor. Someone on the balcony whispered, loud enough to carry, "This is definitely going on the Slack thread." A subtle draft moved through the atrium as an elevator opened and closed, a mechanical inhale that brought with it the city's distant night, the faint smell of rain on concrete, exhaust, and the silent, humming choir of streetlights. Marcus rolled the tension out of his shoulders and felt a small click in his spine, like a lock opening in a door that had been sealed for years. He hadn't tried like this in ages. Dalton reeled off a tactic with the loud, performative confidence of a TED Talk speaker. His queen began strafing, his bishop pinning down a piece. "There," Victoria said, pointing without touching. "Progress." Marcus's hand hovered over his knight like a hawk adjusting to a shift in the wind. He set it down, not on the obvious aggressive square, but on a patient one, a dull, defensive square that looked almost like an admission of surrender. A few small groans rose from the crowd. They were here to watch a man stumble and fall, not to watch him think. Victoria smiled with pity, an emotion she had clearly misfiled under the category of kindness. "It's not personal," she told Marcus, and the calculated lie of it flashed so brightly in the polished space that he almost laughed. "Of course it is," he said, his voice cutting through the manufactured pity. He pressed his clock. Dalton's fingers hovered over the board like a man auditioning for the role of genius. He moved fast, driven by ego, not by thoughtful strategy. Each click of a peace landing was like punctuation in a rehearsed speech meant to impress a room, not to win a war. Every motion begged for validation, and Victoria's approving, subtle glances fed him like vital fuel. The atrium had transformed into an amphitheater of glass and ego. Executives leaned forward, wine glasses in hand, their reflections merging seamlessly with the city's nightscape beyond the pristine walls. The office lighting dimmed slightly as the building's automatic system prepared for its final shutdown, but no one noticed the subtle shift. The collective glow of their phones lit their faces like candles around a spectacular, inevitable failure. "Come on, Mark," someone called out, laughter bubbling forth. "Don't let the man mop the floor with you." The pun cracked the crowd open. Laughter spilled out, too loud, too free, echoing off the high ceilings and bouncing around the space like broken glass. Marcus didn't flinch. His gaze stayed fixed on the board, his breathing even, slow and deliberate. The seconds ticked on the chess clock, a twin metronome marking both pride and patience. "He's wasting time," whispered a voice near Victoria's ear, concerned by the silence. She smiled faintly, her eyes glittering with that executive cool that came from years of effortlessly controlling rooms, contracts, and men. "Patience is a poor man's luxury," she said softly, loud enough for a few to hear and internalize the sentiment. Marcus's fingers shifted. Bishop to f4. Quiet, elegant, and almost completely unnoticed until Dalton frowned, his confidence faltering. "Oh," he muttered, suddenly uncertain which of his pawns had just been subtly pinned. "You play often?" Victoria asked, her tone soaked in performative disbelief. "At work? Between trash runs?" Marcus said nothing for a long moment. The omnipresent hum of the building filled the silence. Air vents, distant printers, the faint rattle of an elevator shaft far away. "My father taught me," he finally said, looking at a spot just past Victoria's shoulder. He said, "You don't move first, you move right." Dalton smirked, dismissing the philosophy as sentimentality. "Cute philosophy. I prefer profit over patience." He lunged dramatically with his queen, a gesture as dramatic as a curtain drop. A low whistle came from the balcony. The camera phones zoomed in closer. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was high-stakes theater. Power had turned into pure, self-serving performance. Every suit in the room wanted to feel close to it, to be seen nodding at the right moments. The janitor against the VP. The story wrote itself in real time. Your hesitating Victoria taunted, pressing for a reaction. Analysis paralysis. Typical. Marcus moved a pawn. Simple, humble, and defensive. The crowd tittered nervously. "Oh, this is painful," someone whispered. "He's getting wiped." Dalton's smirk grew wider, confirming the expectation. "Hey, boss," he said over his shoulder, addressing Victoria. "I might need a witness for that marriage proposal." Victoria laughed, the sound brittle and excessively bright. "Don't flatter yourself. You still have to win." "Don't worry," Dalton said, waving a hand dismissively. "This is under control." Marcus looked up then, not at Dalton, but directly at her. "It usually is," he said quietly. For the first time all night, Victoria's expression faltered. It was the kind of brief, minute crack that only appears when someone hears a sentence they don't quite understand yet, but which carries undeniable weight. "Keep moving," she ordered, her voice now sharper than before. "This isn't a debate club." The tension thickened, a growing fog of expensive champagne and corporate cruelty. Someone nervously whispered about the HR nightmare this whole spectacle could easily become, but nobody moved to stop it. The scene was too alive, too risky, too intoxicating. Every ticking second promised humiliation, and they all wanted a front-row seat to watch the fall. Dalton struck again. Knight to G5, aggressively trapping Marcus's bishop. "There we go," he announced, triumphant. Cornered. The crowd cheered lightly, their complicity secured. Victoria clapped once, her lacquered nails clicking together sharply. "Don't let him distract you, Reed," said a voice, soft and entirely unexpected. It was the receptionist. She stood now, half behind her counter, her face pale under the cool, blue monitor glow. Her tone carried a strange blend of quiet concern and sudden, surprising courage. "Focus." Marcus glanced up briefly, enough to nod once, the acknowledgement subtle but deeply sincere. Then he breathed out and moved. Bishop to G5. Dalton's victorious grin evaporated completely. "Wait, what?" He leaned forward abruptly, eyes darting over the squares. The murmurs shifted pitch dramatically. Did he trap the queen?" Someone stammered. No, he didn't." "Oh, wait." Gasps, scattered and deeply uncertain, swept through the executive ring. Victoria's expression cooled instantly into something unreadable, her jaw tightening. "Fluke," she stated, forcing the word out. "He got lucky." Marcus didn't respond. He simply pressed the clock. The entire rhythm of the game changed instantly. Dalton's confidence fractured, replaced by frantic uncertainty. His movements were less theatrical now, more cautious and visibly labored. The spectators noticed the shift, and their laughter thinned out into uneasy silence. "Speed it up," Dalton, Victoria urged, sensing the change in momentum. "You're losing the tempo." "I've got it," he snapped back, but his hands trembled slightly when he reached for the next piece. A detail the camera phones caught and magnified. "Is he sweating?" Someone whispered. Marcus's next move was quiet, almost invisible. Pawn to E6. Dalton blinked, utterly confused. "What?" he began, but the murmurs rose again, louder this time, and suddenly every phone leaned closer, capturing the slow, inevitable collapse of his position. "He's boxed in," murmured one of the junior VPs. No, there's a way out," another countered, his voice thin and uncertain. "Maybe." Dalton leaned back, frantically rubbing his temples. "You're good," he admitted reluctantly, the concession tasting like ash. "Better than I expected." "That's usually how it starts," Marcus said, his gaze steady on the wood. "People expecting." The crowd grew restless. The energy shifted completely, like the room didn't know whether its role was to keep laughing or start watching the match for real. The receptionist's gaze flicked between them, her fingers tight around the counter's edge. Victoria folded her arms, her patience thinning into something darker and more dangerous. "It's just a game," she said, her voice laced with warning. "Don't make it sentimental." "Games show who we are," Marcus replied, refusing the dismissal. Especially when people are watching. Her jaw tightened further. Do you think this means something? Everything does, he said softly. The words hung in the hyper-controlled air, heavier than they should have been. Dalton tried to rally. Rook slid across the board, his eyes darting between pieces, desperate for an opening. Check, he announced, his voice regaining a false bravado. Almost over. Marcus stared at the board, his hands still, his expression calm and unreadable. The clock ticked. Tick, tick, tick. Your move, Dalton pressed. Marcus's fingers lifted his queen. Moved it. Set it down with that same dignified click. Checkmate. Silence detonated. The sound of the clock clicking into final stillness was deafening in the vast atrium. For one suspended, perfect second, nobody breathed. Then murmurs burst forth, chaotic and shocked. No way. He didn't. He did. Dalton's face went pale, his mouth a thin slash of disbelief. He looked down at the board as if the quartz itself had betrayed him. That's impossible, he whispered. Marcus leaned back slightly, finally relaxing his shoulders. It's math, he said simply. You were thinking money. A sudden, sharp burst of laughter erupted, but not from the executives. It came from the balcony, from the collection of night staff watching through the glass railing. Cleaners, a security guard, a barista still tidying the cafe corner. Their laughter wasn't cruel. It was relief, the sound of air suddenly returning to a suffocating room. Victoria's expression froze, the picture of a CEO whose perfectly scripted narrative had just been hijacked. The cameras were still rolling, recording her paralysis. Well, she said finally, her voice tight, controlled. Congratulations, Reed. You've proven something. You said if he beats me. Dalton began, but Victoria's withering glare cut him off completely. Enough. The authority in her tone reasserted itself, slamming the door shut on Dalton's humiliation. She turned to Marcus, her lips curling into a forced shape. Do you got your handshake? She extended her hand. Sharp, deliberate. The gesture more a command for obedience than a display of courtesy. Marcus looked at it for a long, electric second. Then he rose, took her hand gently, and shook it once, firmly. Apology first, he said quietly. The entire crowd stiffened, shocked by the defiance. Victoria's eyes hardened to steel. You're overstepping. You made the rule, Marcus reminded her. If I win, you apologize. The words were quiet, but perfectly clear, amplified by the flawless acoustics of the glass atrium. Her jaw worked furiously, a pulse visible at her temple. The audience waited, spellbound between curiosity and deep corporate discomfort. Finally, she smiled, a brittle performative curve that didn't reach her eyes. I'm sorry, she said, each syllable wrapped in ice, for wasting your time. She turned sharply, her heels cutting the silence like a knife. Show's over, she announced to the crowd, her voice carrying absolute finality. Everyone back to your lives. But nobody moved, because somehow, everyone knew the real story wasn't finished. The clock was still ticking, and Victoria Vale had just made the wrong kind of enemy. The next morning, the Helix Dynamics Tower gleamed as if nothing unusual had ever happened. The lobby had been polished to surgical perfection. The quartz chessboard glimmered again beneath the spotlights, meticulously cleansed of fingerprints and memory. Yet in every whispering hallway, in every Slack channel disguised as casual chatter, last night's spectacle replayed in digital fragments, clips, quotes, and screenshots of the final board position. Janitor checkmates VP in 12 moves was the caption one intern posted before deleting it under HR's watchful eye. But deletion doesn't erase memory. It only deepens its shadow. Marcus Reed arrived before dawn, as always. He clocked in with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a man who had long made peace with invisibility. His uniform was clean but visibly old, his name patch frayed at the edges. The dull hum of the elevator swallowed him as he rode alone to the subterranean maintenance floor, where the world smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and cold, exposed metal. Nobody there cared about chess or CEOs, only about schedules, square footage, and grinding fatigue. Yet Marcus's mind wasn't on the janitorial checklist taped to the wall. It was fixed entirely on the look in Victoria Vale's eyes when she'd said, "I'm sorry." Not the words themselves, but the way they tasted, poisonous and strangely sweet. She'd delivered them like a weapon, and he had felt the subtle, chilling cut. In the break room, he poured instant coffee into a cracked mug. It bore the faded logo of a community center long closed, the Northwood Youth Initiative, the place that had been his second home as a boy. On its warped linoleum tables, he'd learned that every pawn mattered and that every single move demanded intent. That was before the center was shuttered, before his mother's sudden illness, before the janitorial job that became a sentence more than a salary. He'd been a promising student once, a quiet genius for mathematics and strategy, the kind of talent that blooms hidden in forgotten corners. He'd even made it to the state chess semifinals at 17, coached by a man who told him, "Asterisk, the board is the only place the world's fair. Both sides start equal. Asterisk, but fairness doesn't pay rent." When his mother's lungs failed, Marcus traded university lectures for graveyard shifts. He learned to mop faster than he used to think 3 moves ahead. Still, every night after work, he played chess online, anonymously on an old tablet with a cracked screen, thousands of matches, millions of silent moves no one ever saw. Now that hidden life had stepped into the light, perhaps by accident or maybe by fate. He didn't believe in fate, but last night had felt like something bending, however slightly, toward a moment of justice. He sipped his coffee, grimaced at its bitterness, and checked his phone. No messages. Not from HR, not from anyone. That was good. Silence meant survival, but silence also meant something else. The storm hadn't hit yet. Upstairs, the executives were already spinning the story. Dalton was trying to laugh it off, telling anyone who'd listen that he'd let the janitor win for morale. Victoria had said little publicly, though a pointed memo from her office had gone out at dawn about maintaining professionalism at all levels. It didn't mention names, but everyone knew exactly what it meant. Around noon, when the lunch rush filled the cafeteria with a blend of cheap perfume and high-stakes politics, Marcus took his meal outside. The morning rain had passed, leaving the city gleaming, reflections pooling like liquid glass around his boots. He sat on a bench across the street from the tower, sandwich in hand, and watched his own workplace from the outside. A soaring cathedral of ambition pretending to be progress. The tower was the kind of building that looked like it didn't allow mistakes inside its polished walls. He remembered being a kid, walking past skyscrapers with his mother, listening to her say, "Someday people like us will work up there, too." He'd believed her, and now, technically, he did. Only he wasn't the kind she'd meant. A car pulled up at the curb, a black company SUV with deeply tinted windows. Marcus didn't look up until the passenger door opened. Out stepped Victoria Vale, immaculate even in the brutal clarity of daylight. No makeup was out of place, no hesitation in her stride. She wore a tailored white coat, crisp and long enough to make the city sidewalk look like her personal runway. She saw him. He knew she did. Her gaze flicked over him the way one checks for an invisible layer of dust. Brief, impersonal, dismissive. But then, to his surprise, she approached. The few passers-by slowed, sensing hierarchy in sudden, dramatic motion. "Mr. Reed," she said. She halted her advance, her Italian leather pumps kissing the polished marble floor mere inches from the utility bench where Marcus had been working. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Her delivery was terse, the words stripped down for efficiency. Professional. Marcus straightened slowly, a man deliberately taking his time, wiping his hands on a nearby cloth. "A word, Marcus." He stood taller than she expected. "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to address the events of last night," she continued, her voice meticulously modulated. This wasn't a genuine apology. It was a carefully constructed press release delivered in person. The impromptu gathering was not sanctioned. It certainly does not align with Helix Dynamics' established corporate culture. Marcus watched her, his silence a deliberate challenge. He simply nodded, acknowledging the hollow statement. Her sharp gaze narrowed, assessing him. "I understand some unauthorized footage was captured." It would be highly advisable for you to utilize your influence to discourage any further distribution. These kinds of things can dangerously distort established narratives. Marcus's jaw locked, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. Which narrative exactly are we worried about? He asked, his voice low and steady. The one where I am made to look like I'm humiliating my staff? Or the one where staff successfully embarrass an executive? She dismissed his challenge instantly, her tone flat and cold. Neither scenario is beneficial to the company's image. The truth rarely is, he countered. Her composure fractured slightly, her expression hardening into something glacial. You are a highly intelligent man, Mr. Reed. I would regret seeing that intellect deployed in a manner detrimental to your own career. HR will be requiring a formal statement regarding the incident. I did not personally record anything, he stated clearly. Perhaps not, she conceded. But others did. And the common employee might, shall we say, interpret the events emotionally. Marcus almost let out a disbelieving laugh, catching it just short of his lips. Emotionally? Yes. This corporate environment has no room for sentiment, Mr. Reed. This is not about feeling. It is strictly about managing public perception. Helix dynamics is defined by control, and the foundation of that control is enforced silence. He allowed himself a long, unflinching look at her. He saw the faultless tailoring of her suit, the impeccable, perfect posture, and the almost unnatural, steady calm of someone who had never experienced the vulnerability of being powerless. You know, he finally said, his gaze meeting hers. You once instructed me never to make a mess I couldn't clean up. Yet, Madam CEO, that is precisely the disaster you created last night. A micro-expression, fleeting and instantly suppressed, momentarily crossed her features. A hint of shock or maybe fear, before her mask snapped back into place. She pivoted on her heel and departed without another syllable, her stilettos echoing against the marble like arrogant metronomes counting down the end of his piece. Marcus stood there watching her retreat. He could have simply let the matter drop, sinking back into the safety of his routine. Part of him desperately wanted to, but he possessed a crucial piece of knowledge she lacked. The game was far from concluded. It had only just entered the middle game. That afternoon, the moment his maintenance shift concluded, he bypassed the ground floor and rode the express elevator skyward, ascending far beyond the restricted access level dictated by his badge clearance. He had a contact, Tina from the IT department. She owed him a substantial favor. Only 2 weeks prior, he had meticulously retrieved her diamond engagement ring, which had slipped into a ventilation shaft near the main data servers. Now, Tina stood nervously at the secure entrance. She scanned his badge, her expression tight with apprehension. Are you absolutely certain about this, Marcus? If security catches you up here, it's a guaranteed termination. I require precisely 5 minutes, he assured her. I know the protocol. The elevator logs capture everything. I'll use the fire escape stairs for the descent. Tina sighed deeply, shaking her head in a mix of resignation and fear, then swiped the access panel, the lock clicking open. Remember, you absolutely did not hear this information from me. The executive floor was another world. The air was sterile, scented with ozone, bespoke leather, and the heavy weight of old money. Glass offices shimmered with a cold, minimalist cruelty designed to intimidate. Victoria Vale's name, rendered in elegant, frosted lettering, dominated the main partition. V. Vale, Chief Executive Officer. Marcus stood facing the inscription, feeling the combined weight of every late night he had spent mopping and polishing the floors beneath her feet, the silent labor pressing down on him. Then, through the glass, he saw it, the chessboard. It was positioned near her panoramic window, recently dusted by a colleague, yet deliberately left uncleared. The black and white armies were frozen in the exact configuration where the game had concluded. Checkmate. A slow, private smile touched Marcus's lips, a silent triumph over the physical hierarchy of the building. He had what he came for and turned to depart. As he walked back toward the restricted stairwell, he passed an open conference room door. Dalton, the vice president of product, was inside, lounging with a few other executives, completely oblivious to his presence. They were consumed by their own gossip. I swear to God, he knew the Karokin defense backward and forward. Dalton was saying, a note of disbelieving amusement in his voice. Who the hell memorizes the subtleties of that opening unless they've been running serious tournament circuits? Another executive chimed in. Maybe he's some kind of side hustler, playing for money in some dingy underground scene or whatever. Dalton gave a casual shrug. Doesn't matter now. Victoria is absolutely livid. She mobilized compliance first thing this morning. Marcus halted just outside the door, seamlessly melting into the periphery, invisible again, just as he had been for years. But now, for the very first time, this anonymity felt like a strategic advantage, a cloak of power, rather than a curse. He continued his descent, departing without making a sound. That night, sequestered in his cramped apartment situated above the rhythmic churn of a 24-hour laundromat, Marcus opened a battered, outdated laptop. He hadn't accessed this specific digital identity in years. His login wasn't M. Reed, the janitor. It was Nightshade 91, his former moniker. He navigated the faded interface, scrolling through archived games, past national championships, and forgotten rankings. There it was. His archived national profile, the one that had garnered headlines and recognition long before the harsh realities of life, had forced him to rearrange his personal board entirely. He stared intensely at the glowing screen, his eyes steady, his fingers hovering over the worn keyboard. The cursor pulsed, patient and expectant. In his inbox, a message from an old chess coach sat unopened, dated nearly a decade prior. It simply read, "You had something special. The game will wait, but the opportunity won't last forever." Marcus allowed himself a faint, almost private smile. He began to compose his reply, and out in the indifferent urban sprawl, far beneath the clamor and neon wash of the city, the hidden chess board in his life began to shift into motion once more. By Thursday morning, the collective consciousness of the Helix Dynamics Tower had absorbed his existence, learning to pronounce his name in hushed tones. Corporate gossip here wasn't loud. It was surgical, past and precise, loaded exchanges that occurred during mandatory espresso breaks and during the silent ascents in the glass elevators. "That's him," someone would quietly confirm near the artisanal coffee station. The janitor. Not just a janitor, but the janitor. The one who had forced the CEO, the Queen, to stumble dramatically. The one figure Victoria Vale's powerful machinery seemed unable to efficiently erase. The story possessed a narrative arc too perfect, too satisfyingly poetic to be confined to the basement. For a corporation that loudly peddled a mythos of pure meritocracy, the sudden, undeniable appearance of high-level intellect blooming unexpectedly inside maintenance coveralls was profoundly destabilizing. Marcus Reed had instantaneously transformed into both a subversive legend and an escalating corporate liability. Victoria knew precisely the extent of the damage. She sat immobile in her corner office, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing her silhouette against the sharp morning light. A corporate queen, perfectly mounted in glass. Her executive assistant, a young man named Simon, hovered anxiously nearby, clutching a buzzing phone. "It's trending on the internal forums again, Ms. Vale," he reported quietly, his voice barely audible. "Someone created a meme. Queen falls to pawn." Victoria's eyes remained fixed on her financial data screen. "Locate it and eradicate it." "We have done that, ma'am. Twice already." "Then eliminate the people responsible for posting it." Simon faltered, his confusion visible. "You mean disciplinary HR action?" She finally lifted her sculpted gaze, focusing the full intensity of her irritation on him. "I mean precisely what my words implied." Her own reflection stared back at her from the mirrored glass, a woman meticulously engineered for ultimate command. Yet, the strain of sleepless nights had cast subtle shadows beneath the perfection. Beneath the veneer of ice-cold composure, the sting of public humiliation festered like a burning rash she could not physically reach or scratch away. She could absorb the blow of losing millions, dropping major clients, even disappointing shareholders. But the loss of face? That was an existential threat. Never face. Schedule an immediate disciplinary review, she commanded, her voice regaining its lethal smoothness. Mr. Reed has violated fundamental professional conduct. The assistant blinked once, clearly perplexed. What specific conduct, ma'am? He accessed the executive floor yesterday without authorization, she supplied instantly, the lie delivered with flawless grace. Retrieve the security footage proving the breach. Get it now. The assistant's momentary silence was dense with understanding. Yes, Ms. Vale. Once he was gone, she permitted herself a slow, controlled exhale and leaned back, her eyes drawn to the chessboard resting on the credenza. She had ordered it professionally cleaned again, but none of her staff dared disturb the arrangement. The final position, the checkmate, remained an immutable, polished monument to her defeat, mocking her regardless of the surface sheen. She briefly entertained the impulse to simply sweep all the pieces into a drawer, but the optics would scream surrender. Instead, she reached out, her long fingers touching the defeated white king, and whispered into the silent room. Accidents can always be arranged. Far below, in the mechanical labyrinth of the service level, Marcus was deeply focused on replacing a burnt-out vacuum motor coil when his walkie-talkie sputtered to life. Read. Report immediately to Human Resources, Level 21. His hands, greasy and skilled, instantly froze over the disassembled motor. The machine's low, persistent hum suddenly sounded like a final, bureaucratic verdict. He deliberately wiped his hands clean on a discarded rag and made his way toward the personnel elevator. The ascent was agonizingly slow, each floor marking another measure of escalating dread. The 21st floor was distinct. The atmosphere was infused with the sterile scent of ozone, expensive vellum paper, and the subtle, chilling menace of administrative power. HR was housed in a massive glass suite, resembling an aquarium dedicated to chilling, professional neutrality. Inside, Ms. Drayden, the head of compliance, sat behind a desk meticulously organized with documents arranged too flawlessly to be incidental. Mr. Reed, she announced, devoid of any emotional inflection. Do sit down. He obeyed. You were identified yesterday accessing restricted areas, she began, her tone prosecutorial. Specifically, the executive floor. I was performing maintenance duties, Marcus stated. Your scheduled assignment did not include that clearance level. I was requested to go up by an employee, he clarified calmly. Tina Kwan. She granted me access. Ms. Drayden adjusted her minimalist frame glasses. We have already consulted with Miss Kwan. She denies explicitly authorizing your presence. Marcus's eyelids dropped momentarily, a slow single blink. He could vividly imagine Tina's face, terrorized and cornered by these precise, cold individuals. He did not, however, blame her. Therefore, Drayden continued, seamlessly moving to the verdict, we are formally logging this incident as a significant breach of protocol. A written warning will be permanently filed against you for the unauthorized access and retroactively for the disturbance caused earlier this week. Several employees have filed reports citing professional discomfort regarding your recent behavior. My behavior? He questioned. Instigating a public spectacle in the atrium, demonstrating open disrespect toward senior leadership. Furthermore, unauthorized recording may have taken place. Marcus leaned forward, focused. I reiterate, I did not record anything. But someone did, she countered, leveling her gaze. And due to your central involvement, you are now irrevocably associated with it. You grasp the fundamentals of corporate optics, don't you, Mr. Reed? He nearly allowed himself a genuine, dark smile. I believe I am beginning to understand perfectly. Her eyes pinched into slits. This consultation is an opportunity for you to demonstrate immediate cooperation. We require your signature on this comprehensive confidentiality agreement, reaffirming total discretion concerning all internal events. She slid a sheaf of documents across the immaculate mahogany desk. The dense legal lines seemed to coil across the page, resembling cold snakes anticipating the slightest warmth. And should you decline, Drayden articulated gently, her voice sickeningly smooth. Then we will be forced to reevaluate your current employment status. She delivered the ultimatum with the calm, patronizing tone of a teacher explaining inevitable consequences to a child. He hasn't signed it. Not yet. Does Ms. Vale personally sanction this process? Ms. Vale is the individual, Mr. Reed, who is currently protecting your employment, Drayden insisted. You should recognize that and show gratitude. Marcus looked directly at her, then down at the offered pen and finally back up. I have practiced gratitude my entire life, he stated quietly, standing up, rejecting the offer. It didn't ultimately change much. He nodded curtly. Ms. Drayden, I will consider your offer, he said, before walking purposefully out of the suite, denying her the opportunity to call corporate security. In the hushed hallway, the recessed fluorescent lights emitted a low electronic hum. His uniformed reflection glided alongside him in the glass partitions, a ghost now made visible. He paused at the elevator bank, pressed the button, and waited. When the doors silently parted, two young analysts inside abruptly cut off a whispered conversation, their nervous laughter instantly dying as they recognized his face. He entered the elevator anyway. They immediately averted their eyes, burying their attention in their smartphones, performing the universal ritual of avoidance. Marcus watched the floor numbers ascend, contemplating the delicate fragility of reputation. How quickly a story of quiet admiration could be deliberately flipped into one of pity or corporate suspicion merely by one executive's calculated breath. When the doors finally opened onto the main lobby, he stepped back into the chaotic symphony of noise. Rushing crowds, the espresso machine hiss, phones ringing frantically. He was no longer the invisible fixture he once was, but this new visibility, he realized, possessed sharp, unpredictable teeth. Tina found him later, hiding partially obscured among the industrial recycling bins in the loading bay. Marcus, she whispered, her voice layered thick with palpable guilt. They cornered me. I had to deny knowing you. It's all right, Tina, he said softly. I completely understand. They are working hard to make everything vanish. The video footage, the memory of the game, the entire event. I expected this. Yes, you should definitely keep a low profile, she urged, casting fearful glances toward the access corridor. HR is nowhere near finished. And Victoria, she is absolutely livid. She convened an emergency meeting with legal and PR first thing this morning. They're constructing a comprehensive counter-response in case anything leaks. Leaks? Marcus repeated. There's an abbreviated clip circulating externally, she revealed quickly. His pulse rate seemed to decelerate, a slow, heavy beat. External? Where exactly? Twitter, Reddit. Someone uploaded the final checkmate sequence. It's already garnered thousands of views. He held her gaze, demanding an answer. Who uploaded it? Nobody seems to know. The profile is completely anonymous, but it's out there now. Marcus let out a long, deliberate exhalation. He hadn't recorded anything himself. He hadn't needed to. Truth, he realized, possessed a dangerous, persistent habit of escaping even the most tightly sealed corporate rooms. Tina's eyes nervously darted toward the main doors. You absolutely didn't hear any of that from me, Marcus. Understood? He nodded once. Thanks. After Tina hurried away, Marcus sat down heavily on an overturned industrial bucket, the steady, distant vibration of the building's massive machinery resonating through the concrete floor. He wasn't consumed by anger yet. He was mostly just bone-weary. But underneath the heavy fatigue, a powerful force was gathering momentum. It wasn't simple revenge. It was deep, unwavering resolve. By late evening, the entire corporation was submerged in quiet, contained chaos. IT specialists frantically scrubbed shared network drives. The PR department rapidly drafted internal talking points, employing sterile language designed to minimize damage. Legal counsel meticulously crafted phrases like isolated incident, gross misinterpretation, and internal disciplinary action. Victoria personally scrutinized every single draft, wielding a thick red pen to strike through any phrase that remotely suggested weakness or concession. "This situation must be terminated immediately," she declared to her inner circle. "I want his employment officially terminated by Monday morning." Dalton, the VP, hesitated noticeably. "Ma'am, that's incredibly risky if the full narrative leaks externally." Her patience snapped. "It won't leak. Not if we manage this operation with absolute precision." Dalton looked nervously toward the darkening city outside the window. "And if we fail?" Victoria offered a chillingly thin smile. "Then I will personally ensure that it is his story that concludes in failure, not mine." But outside the insulated sanctuary of the corporate glass, the sprawling city was already vibrating with a different kind of energy. Screens across the metropolis were lighting up with the same brief, damning clip, comment threads unfolding and multiplying like uncontrollable digital wildfire. And somewhere, shielded by the anonymity of the night, Marcus sat at his small kitchen table, his old laptop open, watching a playback of his own hands moving the final, decisive piece on the board. The world was watching the quiet man win. The power dynamic, the entire board had officially flipped. And this time, Marcus Reed was not merely playing a protracted defense. By Friday morning, Helix Dynamics was engulfed in a silent, corporate kind of fire, the type of controlled burning that occurs exclusively behind locked conference room doors and across encrypted Slack channels. Officially, every press release maintained that the situation was entirely under control. Unofficially, it had spiraled into total chaos. The video had not only escaped containment, it had gone supernova. Major news blogs and industry commentators had seized the narrative. A damning headline began to ripple across millions of screens. "CEO mocks Janitor, then is checkmated." Every repost, every share, carved another deep fracture into Victoria Vale's meticulously constructed empire of absolute control. Her panic-stricken PR team worked like emergency surgeons, desperately attempting to stitch together hurried denials, carefully worded non-statements, and vapid phrases like, "taken entirely out of context," and a light-hearted team-building moment. But the raw, unedited footage broadcast a clear, powerful truth that their professional spin could no longer neutralize. Marcus didn't truly need to read the cascading stream of comments and reactions, but he found himself doing so anyway. He watched the clip, seeing his own hands, darker against the white squares, steady, and methodically moving the pieces under the harsh atrium lights. He could hear Victoria's voice again, sharp, cold, and saccharine. "Beat him and I'll marry you." The sequence inevitably ended with the quiet finality of his checkmate, followed by the stunned silence, the brief, startled applause, and the sudden shake of the recording camera. Millions had now witnessed the moment. Thousands were sharing and analyzing it. Yet, in the indifferent, continuous hum of the vast city, Marcus remained exactly the same man, walking toward the bus stop at dawn, his corporate badge clipped to a uniform that signaled one thing above all else: replaceable. Inside the tower, the atmosphere had become electrically charged. Every conversation immediately dropped to a whisper when Marcus passed by. Some employees offered genuine, admiring smiles, viewing him as a quiet folk hero, a symbolic vessel of small, satisfying justice. Others responded with open glares, terrified of being contaminated by association with a corporate enemy. Dalton avoided him completely, quickly retreating into meeting rooms without risking eye contact. Victoria had not been spotted in the main lobby since the video broke, yet her presence permeated the building, lingering everywhere like an expensive, cloying perfume in a room long after the wearer has departed. At noon, Marcus received a summons again, but this time, the destination wasn't the sterile compliance suite of HR. It was the absolute top floor. He stepped into the elevator, knowing exactly what waited. The doors parted with a soft, metallic sigh, revealing Victoria's corner office door already ajar. The battlefield, the chessboard, remained prominently displayed, frozen in the checkmate position. She stood behind her vast executive desk, arms tightly folded, staring out fixedly at the indifferent city skyline. "Close the door," she instructed, not turning around. He complied. "I assume you have consumed the headlines." I have, Ms. Vale. Do you comprehend the precarious position this places me in? You mean the corporation? She spun around sharply, her eyes alight with fury. No, I mean me. You publicly humiliated me. In front of my entire staff, my investment board, and now the international media. Do you genuinely believe anyone will remember your name next week? They will remember mine. Marcus held her gaze steady and unwavering. Then perhaps they will remember your name attached to a slightly different context. Her smile was lethal, sharp as a honed blade. Do you imagine this single, stupid incident makes you morally superior? A brief viral moment does not construct a hero, Mr. Reed. It creates a temporary distraction. And distractions are easily disposed of. He took a small step into the room, maintaining his eerie calm. You could have simply admitted that you were incorrect. Her laugh was low, brittle, devoid of humor. Incorrect for putting a service worker in his appropriate place? Incorrect for believing I had a place predetermined by you, he corrected. The retort landed with the force of a physical blow. She physically straightened, asserting her height and authority. Do you have any concept of who you are addressing right now? Yes, he stated clearly. A powerful woman who is terrified that her carefully crafted crown has just developed a visible crack. Her hand slammed down onto the thick wood of her desk. Papers fluttered violently. Enough. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. HR will process the formal notice. Suspended for what precisely? Breach of protocol, unauthorized presence on the executive floor, and now, flagrant insubordination. He nodded slowly, processing the charges. You are running scared. I am protecting everything I sacrificed to build. She shot back. Do you know what it takes to earn this chair, to command this floor? Men like you assume you understand struggle, but you have never genuinely fought for power. You have only ever been permitted to watch it from below. I have fought for the right to remain alive, he said quietly, his gaze steady. That, he added, is a fundamentally different kind of war. She paused. A microsecond of unguarded silence that almost exposed a sliver of her own exhausted humanity. Then the formidable mask of the CEO returned. You are finished here. Collect your personal effects and exit the building. He offered no counter-argument. Instead, his eyes drifted one last time to the chessboard resting on her heavy credenza. The terminal position remained unaltered. His queen strategically cornering her king, Victoria's remaining pieces trapped and useless. Marcus reached out, an almost absent final gesture, and nudged one of the defeated white pawns forward one square. She flinched, visibly bristling. Do not touch my board. It ceased being your board the moment I walked in here, he stated, and turned to leave the executive floor for the last time. His walk through the high-rise offices was slow, measured, and profoundly deliberate. Every eye in the vicinity tracked his progress. Secretaries suddenly feigning intense focus on typing, analysts pretending to be absorbed in spreadsheets. He passed Dalton, who stood rigid and utterly frozen near the espresso bar. Their gazes connected for a fraction of a second. Dalton was the first to look violently away. By the time Marcus arrived at the service elevator bank, 2 corporate security guards were already waiting. Professional, polite, yet undeniably firm. They didn't resort to handcuffs or physical contact. They simply shadowed him down to the locker room where his entire life at Helix Dynamics resided inside a standard plastic storage bin. Work gloves, his now useless badge, a half-used pack of gum, and a worn, folded photograph of his mother. He gathered his meager possessions in complete silence. When he finally turned away from the locker, the receptionist, the same young woman who had bravely spoken up during the initial chess challenge, was standing nervously in the doorway. I am so incredibly sorry, Marcus, she whispered. Don't be, he replied. You reminded me to stay focused. I did. Tears welled visibly in her eyes. They are trying to eradicate it now. The footage, they are forcing takedowns everywhere. He managed a small, distant smile. It doesn't matter anymore. People already saw. When he finally stepped out of the building and onto the street, The late afternoon sky was heavy and pregnant with rain. He made no attempt to run or seek shelter, letting the cold downpour drench him. The water streamed down his face, tracing clean, unburdened lines, as if the world was undergoing a sudden, radical reset. He possessed no immediate backup plan, no clear next move charted out, but he felt a strange, steady certainty blooming inside him. This suspension was decisively not the conclusion. Meanwhile, 25 stories above, Victoria was rapidly unraveling. Every incoming notification triggered a fresh, painful tightness in her chest. Frantic emails from the PR firm, multiple missed calls flashing from board members, and a terse text message from Simon. CNN is asking for comment. Her pristine public image, once her most powerful asset, was now being dismembered and immortalized in crude memes, searing hashtags, and intellectual think pieces. The irony was devastatingly lethal. The woman who had been consistently celebrated as the defining symbol of modern, decisive leadership was now universally derided as the cartoonish embodiment of out-of-touch arrogance. She had built her entire ascent on the fundamental principle of total control, but that control was now dissolving pixel by excruciating pixel. By late evening, she summoned Dalton back into her office. He arrived with an obvious wariness, his hands nervously jammed deep into his trouser pockets. "Sit," she commanded. He obeyed stiffly. "I require your assistance," she finally admitted, the words tasting like ash. He blinked at the unusual admission. "Mine? You were present that night. You can manipulate the framing. You can repair this damage. Tell the press it was simply a joke that misfired. A casual, friendly match. You and I were both clearly laughing. That clip is heavily edited." Dalton's throat constricted. "Victoria, I truly cannot." "You owe me this," she snapped, the demand ringing with cold desperation. "Do you honestly believe your meager product team operates without my constant intervention? I have spent years burying your procedural failures. You will comply." He hesitated, gathering a quiet strength. "I can't do it," he stated softly. "It is global now. Everyone saw it for the exact corporate bullying it was." Her glare could have theoretically frozen molten fire. "Watch me fail," she challenged. Dalton left without a response. When the door sealed shut, Victoria sank back into her expensive ergonomic chair, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She looked across the room at the persistent chessboard, her own king still hopelessly trapped by the black pieces. Her reflection swam and wavered in the desk's polished surface, appearing warped and frighteningly small. For the first time in many years, Victoria Vale was consumed by a raw, immediate panic. Down on the street, Marcus walked past the crowded subway entrance and paused at a dimly lit, corner cafe. A faded neon sign in the window promised, "Open 24 hours." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale cigarette smoke, burnt coffee grounds, and the heavy residue of countless forgotten dreams. He took a secluded booth seat, pulled out his older model tablet, and logged back into his competitive account. Nightshade 91. A torrent of notifications immediately flooded the screen, messages streaming in from perfect strangers, from master chess players around the globe. Some offered heartfelt cheers and admiration, others asked for private lessons, and still others extended invitations to professional tournaments. He scrolled past the noise until he found one specific message that made him stop entirely. It was from the Northwood Initiative Foundation, the nonprofit organization that had taken over the dilapidated youth center where he had learned the fundamentals of the game decades ago. The note was beautifully concise. "We saw the video. We're hosting a charity chess gala next month. Would you seriously consider participating in an exhibition match?" Marcus stared at the request, watching the heavy rain streak diagonally down the pane of glass beside him. His reflection looked profoundly tired, yet his eyes now held a focused, internal light he hadn't recognized in years. He typed a single word in reply, "Yes." In the glass citadel high above, Victoria Vale was simultaneously staring at her own wavering image, and whispering the same word, but for a radically different purpose. "Yes," she uttered, her voice thin and shaking with resolve. He is not finished until I explicitly declare him finished. The game, she determined, was nowhere near conclusion. It was merely migrating to a significantly larger, more public board. The ensuing weeks etched permanent, deep lines into the previously spotless, gleaming facade of Helix Dynamics. The immediate, sensationalist headlines eventually cooled down. The hyperspeed social media feeds moved on to the next crisis. But inside the massive glass structure, the atmosphere remained thick, constantly charged with a palpable, unspoken resentment. Victoria Vale returned to the office projecting the manufactured poise of a dethroned monarch grimly reclaiming her throne. Her power suits were sharper, her smile was tighter, and every single word she uttered was now meticulously filtered through layers of legal and PR oversight. She feigned utter calm, but the latent tension was detectable in her smallest movements. The white-knuckled grip on her pen, the fractional extra second she paused before addressing any subordinate. She repeatedly reassured herself that she had weathered far worse corporate storms. This was merely one more public scandal to strategically outmaneuver. Yet, beneath the corporate calm of the glass tower, the underlying power structure was subtly but irrevocably shifting. Marcus Reed had physically vanished from the building, but he had not disappeared from the world's attention. The clip of the checkmate continued to resurface daily in unexpected, viral corners. Business podcasts dissected the power dynamics, academic think pieces explored the intersection of class and race, and his face appeared in motivational reels on Instagram. He was rapidly becoming an unwitting, undeniable cultural symbol. The janitor who beat the CEO. The tagline was so succinct, so perfect, it practically wrote itself. Victoria despised the narrative, not only because it was personally humiliating but because it directly assaulted the fundamental myth upon which she had built her career. The dangerous, comforting lie that intellect always wore Armani and that true power always resided in the corner office. That type of counter-narrative simply did not die quietly. In her subsequent private meetings with the board of directors, she carefully masked her cold fury with calculated strategy. "We are decisively reframing the narrative," she announced coolly to the assembled directors. "We will immediately launch a highly visible mentorship program specifically targeting non-executive staff. It will be positioned as a major commitment to inclusive leadership." One of the board members, a heavy-set, gray-haired man whose custom-made timepiece cost more than a luxury sedan, cleared his throat audibly. "That may manage the optics for now," he conceded, said. "But Vale, we need to talk about the petition." Her expensive pen, a limited edition Mont Blanc, froze mid-scribble above a quarterly report. "What petition?" He slid a sleek, custom-built tablet across the highly polished mahogany table. On its screen, glowing starkly, was the title, "Play the Janitor," a trending campaign that had exploded across social media overnight, already accumulating tens of thousands of signatures. It demanded a public, live-streamed rematch between Victoria Vale and Marcus Reed, specifically for charity. Victoria's jaw clenched, a fine muscle twitching beneath her immaculate skin. "Ridiculous." "On the contrary," he said mildly, leaning back just enough to signal his detachment from the outcome. "The foundation hosting it is the Northwood Initiative. They've already confirmed Reed's participation. Sponsors are extremely interested. Major brands see the optics of the common man narrative. It's compelling." Victoria, highly marketable. Her heart stumbled once, hard, against her ribs. Northwood, the same name she dismissed repeatedly in the society charity circles she occasionally frequented, the same organization she'd quietly ignored precisely because it pursued social impact over immediate corporate prestige. "And if I refuse?" she asked, the ice in her voice fragile. The director gave a thin, calculated smile, the smile of a man who dealt in public perception. "Then it looks like arrogance or worse, fear. Neither suits the Helix brand. Does it?" The word fear hung between them, thick and acrid like smoke from a dying fire. After the meeting, Victoria sat alone in her expansive office, the city glittering at her feet, staring at her reflection again. Always that reflection in the darkened glass. Flawless, perhaps, but now undeniably fragile. She picked up her phone, her thumb shaking slightly as she typed Marcus Reed Northwood into the search bar. She froze when the results loaded. He wasn't just some janitor with a viral clip. He was now listed as a guest competitor for the upcoming Northwood Invitational Charity Tournament, a high-profile event sponsored by multiple major firms and guaranteed to be live broadcast on several streaming platforms. Beside his name, she saw the short, devastating biography. Marcus Reed, former state youth chess champion, Northwood alumnist, community mentor. She leaned back, the leather of her chair creaking under the sudden pressure. Her pulse hammered against her wrists. State champion. She whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Of course he was. She closed the tab, the rage simmering beneath her skin now boiling hot. She hadn't been humiliated by luck. She had been blindsided by someone who'd once stood squarely in her league, someone she'd assumed was beneath her without bothering to look. That night, she opened an expensive bottle of wine, the vintage label meaningless now, and poured a generous glass without care for the measure. The magnetic chessboard sat on her desk, still frozen in the humiliating end position of their first game. She stared at it until the glittering city lights outside her window blurred behind her eyes. You think this is over? She whispered to the static pieces. You think I'll let him define me? But the vast, indifferent city offered no answer. Across town, Marcus sat in the back room of the Northwood Initiative Center, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He was surrounded by a dozen eager kids, hunched over boards too big for the folding plastic tables. The comforting, nostalgic smell of pencil shavings, dusty cardboard, and the faint scent of honest hope filled the air. A girl of about 12, hair pulled back tightly, looked up from her game with a deep frown. Coach Reed, she said, clearly perplexed. Why do you always make us play the same opening? It's slow. He smiled faintly, a tired warmth spreading across his face. Because it teaches patience, Zoe. The best players aren't the fastest. They're the ones who see furthest, who understand time as a weapon. She scrunched her nose, considering. Like you did with that CO lady? A quiet ripple of laughter went through the room, quickly suppressed. Marcus chuckled softly. Something like that. You gonna play her again? Another kid, a shy boy named Kevin, asked. He hesitated, looking toward the door. Maybe you should, Zoe urged, leaning forward conspiratorially. Make her learn patience, too. Marcus laughed softly, but his eyes drifted toward the official flyer taped to the corkboard. It announced the Northwood Invitational in bold, celebratory letters, his name printed beneath the elegant logo. He hadn't expected the sudden attention, certainly hadn't sought it out, but once the invitation came, sanctioned by an organization he deeply respected, it felt right. Not revenge, he thought, staring at the glossy paper. Something purer. Restoration of dignity. He remembered what his old coach used to say, a deep, philosophical rumble. The board reveals the soul. Maybe that was what the world needed to see. When the night ended and the children had been picked up, he stayed behind, a ghost of his old routine, stacking the plastic chairs, wiping down the sticky tables, sweeping the floor meticulously. Old habits, he found, didn't vanish just because one's profile had been elevated. As he turned off the final bank of lights, a man stepped smoothly out from the shadow of the doorway. Marcus Reed. Marcus turned, surprised by the sudden presence. The man was tall, impeccably well-dressed in a bespoke suit, late 50s, with silver hair clipped short and measured, intelligent eyes. Name's David Lang, he said. His voice quiet, devoid of unnecessary emotion. Helix board member. Off the record, I wanted to meet you. Marcus frowned, his arms still loaded with cleaning cloths. Why? Lang offered a thin, calculated smile that never reached his eyes. Because I like balance, Mr. Reed. And right now, the scales at Helix are wildly off. Victoria Vale's unchecked ego is costing us millions. Sponsors are pulling back, investor trust is wavering, and internal morale is non-existent. The board won't admit it yet, but she's teetering. Marcus crossed his free arm. That's your company problem, not mine. It could be yours if you want it to be, Lang said, his voice dropping slightly. Helix needs a public gesture. Something redemptive, something that changes the toxic narrative surrounding the leadership. The charity match is perfect. You play her again. Win or lose, it ends the public humiliation narrative. But if you win again, he let the implication hang in the cool night air. The implication was clear. A new hierarchy would be established. I don't care about humiliating her, Marcus said simply. I don't think you do, Lang replied, nodding slightly as if verifying a known variable. But she does. And she will come for you with everything she has. I'm telling you now as a matter of due diligence. Be ready. She is not planning to lose twice. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression serious. Thanks for the warning. Lang's smile flickered. A transient light. Don't thank me yet. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because arrogance in leadership costs stock value. He turned to go, pausing just before stepping into the main hall. One more thing. When you sit across from her, remember this. She's not playing chess. She's playing survival. When Lang left, the small room felt colder, the silence heavier. Marcus looked at the empty boards, the plastic pieces neatly lined up in their storage boxes like soldiers waiting for orders. He picked up a black pawn, turning the smooth plastic between his fingers. Survival works both ways, he whispered into the empty space. In her penthouse high above the city, Victoria was intensely studying game tapes. Not her own miserable game, but his. She had commissioned an analyst to dig up every available archive, tournament footage from a decade ago. Young Marcus, thinner, his face intense, eyes blazing with a quiet, focused fire, dismantling opponents twice his age with ruthless precision. She watched every calculated move, memorized every tactical trap, every positional nuance. If she was going to sit across from him again, she would be prepared to the point of obsession. She called her assistant past midnight. Get me someone from the National Federation, she commanded, her voice raw with sleepless determination. A coach, a grandmaster, someone who trains professional contenders. Money is irrelevant. A sleepy pause on the line. May I ask why, Miss Vale? Because, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, I refuse to lose twice to a janitor. She hung up before he could articulate an answer. Then she turned to the chessboard, the one still displaying the end of her ruinous defeat, and began resetting it piece by piece, restoring the symmetry of the starting position. Her hand was steady, but her breath was shallow and uneven. Outside, the city pulsed with the glare of 1,000 screens and stories, each one waiting for the next move in this strange, public drama. Far below, in a modest apartment above a bustling laundromat, Marcus closed his laptop after reading the official announcement splashed across a major news site. Helix CEO Victoria Vale accepts charity rematch against Marcus Reed. Live broadcast from Northwood Hall. He leaned back, his eyes closing briefly, hearing the echo of his mother's voice, soft and sure, across the years. The board's fair, baby. Both sides start equal. But tonight, for the first time, he knew that equal didn't mean safe. It meant war. The night of the rematch arrived like a storm wearing a cloak of silence. Northwood Hall, an old, stately auditorium dramatically refitted with shimmering LED panels and high-definition live-stream cameras, glowed eerily at the edge of downtown. Every light seemed sharpened by the fine, persistent rain outside. The marble steps shimmered with wet reflections of upturned umbrellas and clustered microphones. Reporters, slicker-clad and insistent, clustered beneath the awning, trading speculative sound bites and high-stakes gossip. Inside, the crowd pulsed with a different, internal electricity. Anticipation threaded tautly with tension. The stage had been transformed into a battlefield of elegance. Velvet drapes the color of midnight, polished wooden boards, two starkly simple seats beneath a single, blinding spotlight. The world was watching. Victoria Vale arrived flanked by her meticulously vetted PR manager and the grim-faced private grandmaster coach she had hired. Her gown was a severe charcoal silk that caught the light, designed to look less like a dress and more like lilac-tinted armor. The cameras swarmed instantly as she entered, questions slicing the air like invisible knives. Miss Vale, are you confident about the rematch? Do you regret your earlier comments? Will this settle the score? She produced a smile, the expression flawless yet utterly hollow, honed by years of public performance. Tonight, she announced, her voice pitched perfectly for the waiting microphones, is about unity and growth. Chess is a language of respect, and I'm here to speak it fluently. Marcus arrived minutes later, alone, moving through a side entrance, entirely unnoticed at first. He wore a simple, well-maintained gray suit borrowed from a friend. No tie, no entourage, just the stillness he carried with him. When he stepped into the hall, conversation instinctively softened, and eyes turned. He wasn't polished, but his presence didn't need polish. It came from a deep, unshakable core of calmness, the kind that made the surrounding noise seem smaller, irrelevant. He shook hands with the event coordinator, signed the broadcast waiver with steady deliberation, and then moved toward the solitary board. The host announced them to applause that was polite, but definitively not neutral. This wasn't merely a duel between two equal competitors. It was myth and mirror, power and humility, meeting again on the sacred 64 squares. As they took their seats, the lights dimmed to a focused, blinding cone over the table. Cameras zoomed in. The pieces gleamed under the stage light. White or black? The arbiter asked the CEO. Victoria smiled, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. I'll take white. Of course she would. Control first, always. The clock began. Click. She opened with Queen's Pawn, d4. Confident. Classic. Marcus responded with Knight f6, moving toward the Nimzo-Indian defense. Steady, balanced, flexible. The crowd leaned in, murmurs rising and falling like distant surf. Commentators whispered analysis for the global live stream. Dash, she's playing incredibly aggressive this time, one said. His voice hushed. Dash, yes. She's clearly rehearsed this exact opening for weeks. And he's patient, said the other. He's studying, not reacting. The first 10 moves were choreography, a well-known dance of theory, predictable openings and practice counters. But then Victoria leaned in, her eyes sharp, the calculation cold. She launched into a complex, razor-edge trap she'd been practicing exclusively for weeks. Her voice was low enough for only him to hear, laced with condescension. You didn't think I'd come unprepared this time, did you? Marcus smiled faintly, without breaking his gaze from the board. Preparation doesn't change character, Miss Vale. She ignored the quiet jab, her rook sweeping across the board, pressing heavily against his flank. Check, she announced, her voice edged with certainty. He parried calmly, his bishop sliding into defense. The audience murmured at the precision. He wasn't playing faster than her, just cleaner, with an inevitability, as though every move had been meticulously scripted somewhere long ago. Interesting, whispered one commentator. He's forcing a positional endgame. He's not chasing glory or tactics. He's building inevitability. Victoria's breathing slowed, her focus absolute. Her hired coach, seated stiffly in the front row, nodded approval. She pushed her queen forward, a glint of genuine triumph in her eyes. There, she said softly, I've cut off your knight. No escape, Marcus. Marcus studied the board for a long, agonizing moment, his hand hovering over a seemingly innocuous pawn. Then he moved. Simple. Silent. The entire hall went absolutely still. What's he doing? Whispered a frantic voice from the audience. Wait. Oh no. He's setting a positional trap. Victoria leaned in, her eyes narrowed in fierce denial. You can't win with tricks, she hissed. Not tricks, he murmured, meeting her gaze briefly. Truths. 3 devastating moves later, her powerful queen was completely boxed in, staring at a cluster of her own blocked pieces, an expensive ornament with nowhere to go. The audience gasped as a single, collective entity. Cameras zoomed in quickly on her hands as she hesitated, disbelief slicing through her carefully constructed poise. Impossible, she whispered, the word thin and brittle. Everything's possible, he said gently, depending on what you're willing to see. She moved again, desperately trying to recover the material disadvantage, but each piece she touched seemed to collapse another defense. The commentator spoke in low, breathless awe. Now, this isn't a game, one murmured. It's a dismantling. At move 34, she made a fatal misstep, a lunge of pride disguised as strategy, trying to force a trade that wasn't there. Marcus's knight leapt, his rook aligned with brutal finality, and suddenly the pattern was agonizingly clear to everyone watching. He didn't gloat. He didn't even look at her face. He just placed his piece with quiet, definitive certainty. Check. The word echoed across the hushed hall like a profound, tolling bell. Victoria froze completely. The audience leaned forward, breaths caught collectively in their throats. She scanned the board frantically, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. The angles mocked her. Every piece she'd commanded now cornered her. Every defense turned against her. Marcus spoke softly, almost kindly, his voice reaching only her. The hardest part isn't losing. It's realizing you built the trap yourself. Her lips parted, but no words came out. He moved again, the final move. Click. Checkmate. For a heartbeat, the hall was utterly, profoundly still. Then came the applause. Slow at first, hesitant, but quickly growing, cresting into thunderous, sustained approval. The cameras caught every single frame. The quiet man standing slowly, the powerful woman sitting utterly silent, her reflection fractured by the glass surface of the board. But the real turning point wasn't the applause. It was what happened next. Victoria stood up, pale and rigidly controlled. She extended her hand mechanically across the board, the automatic gesture of a defeated professional. "Congratulations," she said through a jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Marcus looked at her. Then he looked deliberately at the cameras, and finally at the enormous, surging crowd. He did not take her hand. Instead, he said, his voice low but amplified, steady, and devastatingly clear. "No, you don't get to turn this into a polite gesture. You mocked a man for what he looked like, for what he earned, for what you thought he was worth. And when you lost the first time, you called it luck. You lost again just now, and you'll call it optics. This isn't about chess, Miss Vale. It's about power. And what happens when people like you forget that power isn't ownership? It's stewardship." A deep, collective hush fell over the room. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate in the sudden stillness. He continued, his voice gaining strength, an indictment of systemic blindness. "I'm not angry, but I am done being small for your comfort." He turned toward the crowd, his gaze encompassing the thousands of watching eyes. "There are a lot of people out there like me, working where no one looks, seeing everything. We clean your offices, fix your mistakes, stay invisible so you can feel important. But we think, we watch, we learn. And sometimes we play chess." The applause started again, hesitant at first, then building rapidly, rolling through the hall like a rising, unstoppable tide. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed mask cracking visibly. For the first time, her perfect, trained posture faltered. She tried to speak, but the words broke before they left her throat, a dry, choked sound. Cameras zoomed in on her trembling hand, still half extended between them. Rejected. Marcus gave a small, grave nod. Respect, not pity, and he walked off the stage. In the control booth, the producer, eyes wide, whispered to his crew, "Don't cut. Keep rolling." The image of Victoria Vale, the once untouchable queen, standing alone beside the checkmated board, the perfect composure annihilated, would circle the world by morning. Backstage, Marcus finally exhaled, a long, rattling breath that felt like the first one in years. The air was cool and the noise from the hall was muffled, distant. A nervous volunteer handed him a bottle of water. His hands shook noticeably as he took it. Through the thin stage curtain, he could hear the reporters swarming, calling her name. "Miss Vale, Miss Vale." A comment. None came. She just stared at the board, at the final, impossible position, a king cornered by humility. In that moment, something in her eyes changed. Not exactly defeat, but something quieter, deeper. Recognition. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. The air smelled clean, washed by the storm. Marcus stepped into it. The city's lights trembled across the wet streets like the glint of a new dawn. The game was over. Or perhaps, for the first time, it had truly begun. The morning after the match, the city didn't just wake up. It buzzed alive, electrified by the echoes of what it had witnessed. Clips of the charity rematch flooded every platform. Marcus Reed's calm dismantling of the CEO who once mocked him, the final checkmate, his quiet, powerful speech about power and invisibility. Every major outlet ran a searing headline. Humility beats hubris. The Queen who fell twice. The Janitor's revenge. The story traveled faster than the storm clouds clearing over the skyline. In the penthouse of Helix Tower, Victoria Vale watched it all unfold on her wall-sized monitor. Her phone vibrated relentlessly. Urgent calls from terrified board members, desperate texts from PR, a formal meeting request from legal counsel. She ignored them all. The morning light burned through the glass, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating the ruins of her reputation. The internet had universally crowned Marcus a symbol of grace and quiet intelligence, and her a monument to unchecked arrogance. "Turn it off," she whispered, though the screens only obeyed when she slammed her palm down hard on the desk, cutting the feed with a jarring electronic snap. For a long, exhausting moment, she just stood there, breathing hard, staring at her reflection in the darkened glass. Her image looked foreign, unfamiliar. Eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep, hair slightly disheveled. The polished sheen of invincibility was gone. She poured herself a glass of water, her hand still trembling slightly. The sound of the water filling the crystal tumbler echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. Her assistant knocked once, then entered timidly, visibly stressed. "Miss Vale," he said softly, "the board is waiting for you in the conference room." She nodded once, automatically. "Schedule it for 10 o'clock. "It's already 10 o'clock, Miss Vale." Her throat tightened. "Then tell them I'll be right there." When the door closed, she exhaled slowly and turned toward the chessboard that had become her confession. It still displayed last night's final position. Her king trapped in the corner, Marcus's knight and rook sealing her fate with clinical precision. She studied it for a long while, then swept the pieces into her hand. They clattered into the drawer with a sound that felt like total, final collapse. Across town, Marcus Reed was sitting in the small, familiar cafe where he always started his mornings. But today, he didn't bring his cleaning gloves or his worn uniform. He wore the same gray suit, sleeves rolled up casually, his laptop open. His inbox was overflowing. Invitations from talk shows, offers for podcasts, requests to speak at schools. Someone had even started a GoFundMe to help the man who humbled the powerful. He had turned it down twice. He didn't want to be famous. He desperately wanted peace and quiet stability. Still, as he scrolled, one email caught his attention, its subject line crisp and professional. Employment offer Northwood Initiative. He opened it. The message was from the foundation's director. "We'd like to bring you on as a full-time youth mentor and program coordinator. The kids loved you. We think you could genuinely change lives here." Marcus leaned back, his eyes closing briefly. Change lives. The phrase sounded too big for him, too grand. But then again, so had everything else he'd done lately. The cafe door chimed softly, and a shadow crossed his table. He looked up and froze. Victoria Vale stood there, drenched in the morning sunlight streaming through the window. She wore no makeup, no corporate armor. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, her coat unbuttoned. For the first time, she looked fully, undeniably human. "May I sit?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Marcus gestured to the chair across from him, his surprise slowly giving way to measured curiosity. "You found me. I had to try," she said, settling down stiffly. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual demanding polish. "I owe you something, Marcus." He waited, letting the silence press her. She clasped her hands tightly on the table, knuckles white against the dark wood. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began, meeting his eyes honestly. "I just need to say it properly this time. I'm sorry." Not the kind of apology that comes from PR drafts or forced handshakes. The real kind. I humiliated you, Marcus. I saw your skin, your job, and decided you were small. You weren't. He looked at her carefully, weighing the sincerity of her words against the memory of her public scorn. That night, he said softly, speaking of the first game, you didn't just insult me. You showed everyone what this place believes, that respect belongs only to titles and wealth. I didn't beat you for revenge. I beat you because I had to remind myself that respect isn't given. It's earned, even when no one's watching. She nodded slowly, absorbing the truth. And you did. For a while. Neither spoke. The cafe hummed around them. Clinking cups, low music, the normal movement of life continuing. I resigned this morning, she said finally, quietly stating a fact that would soon shake the financial world. He blinked. You what? I met with the board. They wanted to suspend me pending an ethics review. I told them not to bother. Helix will survive without me. She let out a hollow, short laugh. Maybe it'll even be better. What will you do now? He asked, genuinely curious. She shrugged faintly. Something real, maybe. I built towers to prove I could. Now I want to see what it feels like to build something that lasts. You sound like someone who's learning, Marcus observed. She smiled, small, weary, and completely sincere. From the best teacher I've met in years. He shook his head, refusing the mantle. I'm not a teacher, just a man who played his game right once. She studied him. You're wrong about that. You reminded people what dignity looks like. The whole world needed that lesson. They sat there for a moment longer, two people on opposite sides of a long, invisible board. Then she reached into her large bag and slid something small across the table. A worn wooden piece. A pawn. I think this belongs to you, she said. Marcus turned it over in his hand, recognizing the smooth weight and the minor chip on its base. You kept it. I kept it to remember who I was that night, she said. Now I'm giving it back to remember who I want to be. He nodded, pocketing the pawn gently. Then maybe there's hope for both of us. When she left, the sunlight seemed to follow her out, catching the edge of the door like a reluctant blessing. That afternoon, Marcus called Northwood back. I accept, he said simply. When do I start? Monday, the director replied, his voice full of excitement. You'll have your own classroom, your own board. He smiled, looking out at the city skyline. I've had one all along. By evening, news of Victoria's resignation broke. The headlines were swift and merciless. Helix CEO steps down amid scandal. But tucked beneath the noise, a smaller, less visible story circulated. Victoria Vale donates $2 million to Northwood Initiative, announces new mentorship fund. No one connected the two actions immediately. Marcus didn't tell anyone either. Some stories don't need narration. They just need to end quietly. Weeks later, on a rainy Saturday, he sat in Northwood Hall again, this time in front of a classroom full of boisterous kids. They chattered, laughed, argued over moves. On the board before them, two simple pawns stood face to face. Remember, he told them, his voice patient and firm. Power doesn't come from being loud or being rich. It comes from knowing where to stand when others look away. A small hand shot up. Coach Reed, who taught you that? He smiled. A deep, knowing expression. A very bad teacher who turned out to be a very good lesson. The kids laughed, not knowing the story fully, not needing to. Outside, the rain tapped against the windows in soft, rhythmic applause. And miles away, in a quiet, anonymous apartment overlooking the same sprawling city, Victoria Vale sat alone with a new chessboard, a simple, non-magnetic wooden set. No cameras, no audience. She studied the pieces, then opened a leather-bound notebook beside her. On its first page, in small, precise handwriting, she wrote, Lesson 1. Never underestimate the quiet ones. She placed her queen perfectly on the board and whispered to the empty room, Your move, Marcus. But she said it without bitterness, only respect. For once, the game wasn't about victory. It was about understanding. And in that, the heavy armor of their preconceptions finally fell away. In that space of deep, shared understanding, Both figures ceased their decades-long, desperate pursuit of false idols. What they ultimately captured wasn't power, nor the suffocating grip of control they thought they needed to survive, but the profound, resonant silence of true peace. The quiet man who swept the dust, the janitor scorned by high society, stood revealed as the most insightful teacher the Queen had ever encountered. His lessons were given without words, manifested only through patience and perspective. In turn, the Queen, accustomed to dictating reality, finally shed the restrictive robes of her position, embracing a radical and necessary humility. And the entire rigid, hierarchical world, if only for that singular, illuminating breath, seemed to pause and absorb the lesson. It was a potent reminder that whether across the polished squares of a chessboard or on the complex, unforgiving terrain of existence, every single component, from the mighty monarch to the overlooked pawn, possesses the intrinsic capacity to redefine the entire course of the game.